Louis Brandeis was a brilliant legal mind and progressive reformer who became one of the most influential Supreme Court justices in American history. Louis Dembitz Brandeis, lawyer, advocate, and Supreme Court justice, was born in Louisville, Kentucky on November 13, 1856. He came from an immigrant family of comfortable means. He had a penetrating intellect and fierce commitment to social justice. Brandeis's early years were marked by intellectual curiosity and a passion for learning that would define his entire life. Brandeis came from a family of Jewish immigrants who had fled Europe after the failed revolutions of 1848. His parents, Adolf and Frederica Brandeis, were educated, cultured people who valued learning and progressive ideals. They provided their children with a stimulating home environment filled with books, discussion, and debate. Young Louis absorbed these values and developed an early love of reading and intellectual inquiry. The Brandeis family was financially successful. Adolf Brandeis operated a grain business that prospered in Louisville's growing economy. This financial security allowed the family to provide Louis with excellent educational opportunities. He attended public schools in Louisville where he excelled academically, showing particular aptitude for mathematics and languages. His teachers recognized his exceptional abilities early on. In 1872, when Louis was 16, the family traveled to Europe for an extended stay. The trip was partly for pleasure and partly for business, but it also provided educational opportunities for the children. Louis attended schools in Dresden, Germany, where he studied German language and culture. The experience broadened his worldview and exposed him to European intellectual traditions. He returned to America with fluency in German and a more sophisticated understanding of history and politics. After returning from Europe, Brandeis entered Harvard Law School in 1875 at the age of 18. He had not completed an undergraduate degree, but Harvard's admission standards were more flexible in that era. At Harvard, Brandeis found his calling. He threw himself into his legal studies with extraordinary dedication and intensity. He read voraciously, attended every lecture, and engaged deeply with legal principles and theory. Brandeis's performance at Harvard was nothing short of spectacular. He achieved the highest grade point average in the history of the law school up to that time. His professors recognized him as a student of exceptional ability. He graduated in 1877 at the age of 20, though he had to wait until he turned 21 to officially receive his degree due to age requirements. His academic achievement established his reputation as a brilliant legal mind. After graduation, Brandeis briefly practiced law in St. Louis before returning to Boston in 1879. He formed a law partnership with Samuel Warren, a classmate from Harvard. The firm of Warren and Brandeis quickly established itself as one of Boston's most successful practices. Brandeis proved to be not just a brilliant legal theorist but also a skilled practitioner who could win cases and attract clients. The law practice prospered and Brandeis became wealthy. He represented major corporations and handled complex commercial litigation. His analytical abilities and thorough preparation made him formidable in the courtroom. He had a gift for mastering the details of complicated cases and presenting arguments with clarity and force. Clients were willing to pay premium fees for his services. However, Brandeis was not content to simply make money representing corporate interests. He became increasingly concerned with social and economic justice. He began taking cases that addressed public interest issues, often without compensation. He represented workers, consumers, and citizens groups challenging powerful corporate interests. This work earned him the nickname the People's Lawyer. In 1890, Brandeis and Warren published an article in the Harvard Law Review titled The Right to Privacy. The article, primarily written by the two lawyers, argued for legal recognition of a right to privacy that would protect individuals from intrusive press coverage and other invasions of personal dignity. The article became one of the most influential law review articles ever published. It laid the groundwork for privacy law in America and is still cited by courts today. Brandeis's progressive activism intensified in the 1890s and early 1900s. He opposed monopolies and corporate consolidation, believing that concentrated economic power threatened democracy. He fought against corrupt business practices and advocated for government regulation to protect workers and consumers. He became involved in numerous reform causes including improved working conditions, savings bank insurance, and conservation of natural resources. One of Brandeis's most significant early reform efforts involved the Boston subway system. He represented civic groups fighting against a proposed monopoly franchise that would have given one company exclusive control over Boston's public transportation. Brandeis argued that such monopolies were economically inefficient and politically dangerous. His efforts helped establish the principle that public utilities should be regulated to protect the public interest. Brandeis also became deeply involved in labor issues. In 1910, he represented garment workers in New York during negotiations following a major strike. He helped develop the Protocol of Peace, an agreement that established mechanisms for resolving labor disputes without strikes. The protocol included provisions for arbitration, union recognition, and improved working conditions. It was seen as a model for labor management relations. In 1908, Brandeis argued a landmark case before the United States Supreme Court, Muller v. Oregon. The case challenged an Oregon law limiting the working hours of women. Rather than relying solely on legal precedent, Brandeis submitted a brief that included extensive social science data demonstrating the harmful effects of long working hours on women's health. The brief contained only 2 pages of legal argument but over 100 pages of sociological and economic evidence. The Supreme Court upheld the Oregon law, and the Brandeis brief, as it came to be known, revolutionized legal advocacy. It established that courts could consider social and economic facts, not just legal precedents, when deciding constitutional questions. The approach influenced legal practice for generations and demonstrated Brandeis's innovative thinking about law and society. Brandeis married Alice Goldmark in 1891. Alice came from a progressive family and shared Louis's commitment to social reform. The marriage was happy and produced 2 daughters. Alice supported her husband's work and was herself involved in various progressive causes. The Brandeis household was intellectually stimulating, with constant discussion of social issues and reform movements. Throughout the early 20th century, Brandeis continued his reform work while maintaining his lucrative law practice. He investigated insurance company abuses in Massachusetts and helped establish a system of savings bank life insurance that provided affordable coverage to working people. He fought against monopolistic practices by railroad companies and utilities. He advised progressive politicians on economic and social policy. Brandeis became associated with the progressive movement that was gaining strength in American politics. He advised Theodore Roosevelt on antitrust policy and later became a key advisor to Woodrow Wilson during the 1912 presidential campaign. Brandeis helped shape Wilson's New Freedom platform, which emphasized breaking up monopolies and restoring economic competition. Wilson's victory in 1912 brought progressives to power and raised Brandeis's national profile. After Wilson's election, there was speculation that Brandeis might receive a cabinet appointment. However, his progressive views and his battles with powerful corporate interests had made him enemies among conservative business leaders. When Wilson nominated Brandeis to the Supreme Court in January 1916, the nomination triggered one of the most contentious confirmation battles in American history. Opposition to Brandeis was intense and came from multiple sources. Corporate leaders whom he had opposed in various legal battles worked to defeat the nomination. Conservative lawyers, including former President William Howard Taft, argued that Brandeis was too radical and lacked judicial temperament. 7 former presidents of the American Bar Association opposed the confirmation. Anti-Semitism also played a role in the opposition, though it was rarely stated explicitly. Brandeis would be the first Jewish justice on the Supreme Court, and some opponents were uncomfortable with this prospect. Whisper campaigns questioned whether a Jew could be truly American. The prejudice was real, even if it was often disguised as concerns about judicial philosophy or legal qualifications. The confirmation hearings lasted for months. Opponents made various charges against Brandeis, claiming he was unethical, radical, and unsuited for the bench. Supporters rallied to his defense, presenting evidence of his integrity and legal brilliance. Progressive senators fought for the nomination while conservatives worked to defeat it. The battle became a proxy war between progressive and conservative visions of America's future. Finally, in June 1916, the Senate confirmed Brandeis by a vote of 47 to 22. It was largely a party-line vote, with Democrats supporting and Republicans opposing. Brandeis took his seat on the Supreme Court at the age of 59. His appointment was a watershed moment, both because of his progressive philosophy and because he broke the religious barrier that had excluded Jews from the nation's highest court. On the Supreme Court, Brandeis became one of the most influential justices in American history. He served for 23 years, from 1916 to 1939, and authored numerous opinions that shaped American law. His judicial philosophy emphasized restraint in economic regulation, protection of civil liberties, and respect for federalism. He believed courts should defer to legislative judgments on economic and social policy while vigorously protecting freedom of speech and other fundamental rights. Brandeis often found himself in dissent during the conservative 1920s. The court's majority frequently struck down progressive economic legislation, but Brandeis argued for judicial restraint and respect for democratic decision-making. His dissents were carefully crafted, thoroughly researched, and powerfully argued. Many of his dissenting opinions later became majority views as the court's philosophy evolved. One of Brandeis's most famous opinions was his dissent in Olmstead v. United States in 1928. The case involved government wiretapping, and the majority held that wiretaps did not violate the Fourth Amendment because they did not involve physical trespass. Brandeis dissented, arguing that the Constitution protected privacy and that wiretapping was a serious invasion of that privacy. His dissent presaged later developments in privacy law and was vindicated when the court overruled Olmstead decades later. Brandeis was also a powerful advocate for freedom of speech. In Whitney v. California in 1927, he wrote a concurring opinion that became one of the most eloquent defenses of free expression in American law. He argued that the remedy for harmful speech was more speech, not suppression. He emphasized that freedom of thought and expression were essential to democracy. His words have been quoted countless times in subsequent free speech cases. Throughout his tenure on the court, Brandeis maintained his commitment to thorough research and careful analysis. His opinions were heavily footnoted with citations to social science data, economic studies, and historical sources. He believed judges needed to understand the real-world context of legal disputes, not just abstract legal principles. His chambers were filled with books and his law clerks spent countless hours researching the factual background of cases. Brandeis developed a close friendship and intellectual partnership with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. The two men often voted together and shared a philosophy of judicial restraint in economic matters. They were both skeptical of the court's tendency to strike down progressive legislation. Their dissents during the 1920s laid the groundwork for the constitutional revolution of the 1930s when the court finally accepted greater government regulation of the economy. Despite his progressive views on economic regulation, Brandeis was a strong believer in federalism and states' rights. He thought states should serve as laboratories of democracy, experimenting with different approaches to social problems. He was skeptical of concentrated federal power, believing that decentralized government was more responsive to citizens and less susceptible to corruption. This aspect of his philosophy sometimes put him at odds with other progressives who favored federal solutions. Brandeis was also deeply committed to Zionism, the movement to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. He became involved in Zionist activities in 1912 and quickly emerged as a leader of American Zionism. He served as chairman of the Provisional Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs from 1914 to 1918. He saw Zionism as consistent with American values, arguing that Jewish national revival would allow Jews to fully develop their talents and contribute to civilization. His Zionist activities created some controversy when he was nominated to the Supreme Court. Critics questioned whether his commitment to Zionism conflicted with his duties as an American judge. Brandeis rejected this argument, insisting that Zionism was a cultural and humanitarian movement, not a political loyalty to a foreign state. After joining the court, he reduced his public Zionist activities but continued to support the movement privately and financially. On the court, Brandeis lived modestly despite his wealth. He and Alice maintained a simple apartment in Washington and spent summers at their home in Chatham, Massachusetts. He continued his habit of rigorous intellectual work, reading extensively and staying informed about economic and social developments. He was known for his discipline and focus, maintaining a strict daily routine of work and exercise. Brandeis's influence extended beyond his judicial opinions. He advised President Franklin Roosevelt during the early New Deal, though he later became concerned that some New Deal programs created excessive federal bureaucracy. He preferred more decentralized approaches to economic recovery. His concerns about government size and efficiency reflected his lifelong skepticism of concentrated power, whether in private corporations or government agencies. As the 1930s progressed and Roosevelt appointed new justices to the court, Brandeis found himself less often in dissent. The court began upholding New Deal legislation and accepting broader federal regulatory power. Brandeis's earlier dissents had helped prepare the way for this constitutional transformation. His ideas about judicial restraint in economic matters became the new orthodoxy. In 1939, at the age of 82, Brandeis retired from the Supreme Court. His health was declining and he felt he could no longer perform his duties with the vigor they required. His retirement was widely mourned by progressives who saw him as a champion of social justice and civil liberties. He had served on the court for 23 years and had profoundly influenced American constitutional law. After retirement, Brandeis lived quietly in Washington with Alice. He continued to read and follow current events but avoided public commentary. His mind remained sharp even as his physical health deteriorated. He stayed in touch with former law clerks and friends, maintaining his interest in legal and political developments. Alice Brandeis died in 1945, 4 years after Louis's death. The couple had been married for 50 years and had been true partners in life and work. Alice had supported Louis's career and shared his progressive values. Her death marked the end of a remarkable partnership. On October 5, 1941, Louis Brandeis died at his home in Washington. He was 84 years old. The cause of death was heart failure. His funeral was simple, reflecting his preference for modesty over ostentation. He was buried in Louisville, Kentucky, his birthplace, in a family plot. Brandeis's legacy is profound and enduring. He transformed American law through his innovative legal arguments, his influential judicial opinions, and his commitment to social justice. The Brandeis brief revolutionized legal advocacy by incorporating social science evidence. His Supreme Court opinions on privacy, free speech, and federalism continue to influence constitutional law. His vision of lawyers as public servants who use their skills to advance justice inspired generations of attorneys. Modern legal scholars consistently rank Brandeis among the greatest Supreme Court justices in American history. His opinions are still cited regularly by courts and lawyers. His ideas about privacy have become more relevant in the digital age. His defense of free speech remains a cornerstone of First Amendment jurisprudence. His skepticism about concentrated power resonates in contemporary debates about corporate monopolies and government surveillance. Brandeis's commitment to Zionism also left a lasting legacy. He helped build American support for the establishment of Israel. Brandeis University, founded in 1948, was named in his honor and embodies his commitment to academic excellence and social justice. The university serves as a living memorial to his values and achievements. Perhaps most importantly, Brandeis demonstrated that legal brilliance and social conscience could coexist. He proved that a lawyer could be both successful and principled, that one could serve wealthy clients while also fighting for the powerless. His example inspired countless lawyers to use their skills for public service and social reform. The tradition of public interest law in America owes much to his example. Brandeis also broke barriers as the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. His appointment opened the court to religious diversity and challenged the informal barriers that had excluded Jews from the highest levels of American society. His success on the court demonstrated that merit, not religious background, should determine fitness for public service. His legacy includes this contribution to religious equality in American life. In the end, Louis Brandeis was a transformative figure in American law and society. He was a brilliant lawyer who used his talents to advance justice. He was a progressive reformer who fought against concentrated power and economic inequality. He was a Supreme Court justice whose opinions shaped constitutional law for generations. He was a Zionist leader who helped build support for Jewish national revival. He was a teacher and mentor who inspired others to pursue law as a form of public service. Brandeis's life spanned a period of enormous change in American society, from the Gilded Age through the Progressive Era to the New Deal. He was both a product of these changes and a force shaping them. His ideas about corporate power, economic regulation, privacy, and free speech addressed the challenges of modern industrial society and remain relevant today. Unlike many historical figures whose reputations have faded with time, Brandeis's influence has only grown. His judicial opinions are cited more frequently now than during his lifetime. His ideas about privacy have gained new urgency in an age of digital surveillance. His warnings about corporate concentration resonate in an era of tech monopolies. His vision of law as an instrument of social justice continues to inspire new generations of lawyers and reformers. Louis Brandeis died as he lived, with dignity and purpose. He had devoted his extraordinary intellect and energy to making America more just and democratic. He had fought against privilege and power on behalf of ordinary citizens. He had served his country with distinction on its highest court. He had broken barriers and opened doors for others. His legacy endures in American law, in progressive reform movements, and in the ongoing struggle for social justice.